Welcome, welcome. My name is Deirdre Harris Kelly, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Romare Bearden Foundation, along with co-director Joanne Bryant Reed. We want to just welcome you and just delighted for this conversation tonight. I'm very excited. I welcome you to the Cinque Artist Talk series. If you haven't joined in on any of our talks, you can find them on our Facebook page and on the Harlem One Stop YouTube page. We've been doing this now all during the pandemic, and we've had some wonderful, wonderful talks. This program, the Cinque Artist Program, is named from the historic Cinque Gallery found by artists Romare Bearden, Norman Lewis, and Ernest Critchlow. It ran as a nonprofit for almost 40 years, giving artists and curators of color opportunities to exhibit and sell their work. The Bearden Foundation program celebrates this part of Bearden's legacy by giving artists a platform to talk about their work and for other artists to engage in our network. And I want to thank the many of you who do participate in our programs and you show up and attend. This is for you. Tonight, we celebrate another collaborative effort of the artist, Romare Bearden, by revisiting the Spiral Group, the collective of Black artists that came together on July 5th, 1963, 60 years ago. Bearden was involved in many efforts to better the lives of Black people and particularly for artists. Another huge part of our legacy work right now is participating in the production of the Catalogue Raisonné, being published by the Wildenstein-Platner Institute. For this project, the foundation lent our Bearden archives and other materials to be digitized for the project. These materials can now be viewed for free on the WPI's website. Look out for a link at the end of the program. And on that note, I want to mention that tonight's moderator is Camara Dia Holloway, the project director for the Catalogue Raisonné on Bearden, Romare Bearden, and working with the WPI Wildenstein-Platner Institute. I always want to shorten that, but we shouldn't. But after I introduce Camara, then I'm going to turn the program over to her. But I do want to say we're hoping that we have enough time for Q&A. So if you have any questions or comments, even put them in the Q&A box down below so that we can see them. All right, here we go. Dr. Camara Holloway is the project manager, as I said, for the Catalogue Raisonné. Her research expertise is on 20th century American and African-American art with a special knowledge of African-American photography and critical race art theory. Oh, no, sorry, critical race art history. She is the founding co-director of the Association of Critical Race Art History. Holloway's graduate work was at Yale University and her undergraduate work at Barnard College. She has previously taught at the University of Delaware, the University of Southern California, Swarthmore College, and Sarah Lawrence College. Holloway curated the exhibition Portraiture and the Harlem Renaissance, the photographs of James L. Allen at the Yale University Art Gallery in 1999, which rescued the Harlem Renaissance photographer from obscurity. Her most recent publication is the essay Dark Stars, Reinventing Blackness in the Interwar New York-London Circuit in the peer-reviewed journal American Art. I want to just say thank you to Camara for joining us and for hosting as moderator today. So without further ado, Camara, join us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Deirdre, for the introduction. I'm pleased to be able to moderate this conversation about Spiral as we commemorate the 60th anniversary of its founding. Can we have the first slide? I'm going to show you a photograph of Bearden posing in front of the space that they rented on Christopher Street on the occasion of their first exhibition in May 1965. This is one of the documents that's part of the Romare Bearden papers. And as Deirdre mentioned, you can see these materials now digitized on the website of the Wildenstein-Platner Institute at wpi.art. We're fortunate this evening to have Richard Mayhew and Courtney Martin joining us for our discussion about this important artist collective. Let me give you a brief introduction to them. Richard Mayhew, who we'll see on the next slide, is an Afro-Native American artist, illustrator, and arts educator. He is the recipient of many awards and grants, including a John Hay Whitney Fellowship, a Ford Foundation grant, a Tiffany Foundation Award, and a National Academy of Design Merit Award. His work is collected by major museums like the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, and the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. He's a founding member of the Spiral Group. And this photograph that you're looking at is from his archive, which shows the family at the opening of the Spiral exhibition in 1965. We're also joined by Courtney Martin, who's the Paul Mellon Director of the Yale Center for British Art. Previously, she was the Deputy Director and Chief Curator at the Dia Art Foundation. She taught at Brown University and the University of California, Berkeley, and worked for the Ford Foundation. She holds a doctorate from Yale University, and she's the author of the 2011 article from the Center, The Spiral Group, 1963 to 1966 for the INCOD Journal. Thank you both for being here. I want to begin with this next slide with an image of Bearden's handwritten list of the members of Spiral. And I'd like to do a roll call to highlight everyone who participated in the collective. Some names are better known than others, but they all deserve a mention. In alphabetical order, the artists were Charles Alston, Emma Amos, Romare Bearden, Calvin Douglas, Harry Ferguson, Reginald Gammon, Felrith Hines, Alvin Hollingsworth, Norman Lewis, William Majors, Richard Mayhew, Earl Miller, Merton Simpson, Hale Woodruff, and James Jurgens. So these are the artists who gathered to form this important collective. And I'd like to ask Richard to join us now and find out from him how he became a member of Spiral.
Okay, now.
Hale Woodruff, I met when I came back from Europe, and there was an exhibition at the Bronx Museum, and I met Felrith Hines at the meeting, and he looked around and saw there's other members, minorities in the show. So he came over and introduced himself. And I found that he was one of the members of Spiral. He was one of the leading members. And he brought me to Spiral, introduced me to the elders, which is Romare Bearden and Norman Lewis and Hale Woodruff. and which was important at the time. There was a special exchange meeting the elders, which I only heard about and never met them before. So this was a beginning, and they didn't know anything about the younger artists. I was one of the younger artists, so I had a listing of the younger artists, which I met in Greenwich Village, and I introduced them to the elders. I brought them together to introduce them to the elders. So there was a beginning of Spiral. The elders and the youngers came together and was involved with a mutual need of fighting omission and denial that was going on between the art establishment at the time. The omission was involved, and what we were trying to find out who's in charge and who's controlling the omission and denial of African American artists. But also at the same time, in the 60s, no women were admitted and also was involved with completely omission and denial. So we were bent on finding through mail, through phone calls, through other avenues of so we could find out who's in charge of control of the omission and denial.
Okay, wonderful. And Courtney, can you join us? I wanted to know how you started your research on Spiral.
First of all, thank you so much, Camara, for that lovely introduction. And I'm so excited to be in the space with Richard, even if it's virtual. I started this research largely because I was very interested in Lewis. Lewis really led me, I think, his early work in abstract expressionism being, I think, a real forerunner to that movement, really the establishment of an American aesthetic that both grew from the antecedents in early American portraiture, but also in European modernism. I think Lewis was at the vanguard of this. And so I was very interested in everything else that Lewis, in which he was involved. And so that led me ultimately to Spiral.
Great, great. So we have this group of artists, and if we can go to the next slide, this is the catalog for the exhibition that documents the artists. And I'm curious, Richard, if you could tell me why you started to talk about this. Why were there, when there were so many Black artists, how did this particular group come together to form Spiral? The 15 that joined, how did they come together?
Well, they came up, the elders you're referring to was the ones who came from the Harlem Renaissance, and also for Indiana Census Institute of the Arts also brought Hale Woodruff came from there, and so did Fellows Hines, and the others came from the Harlem Renaissance, the elders. And so there was a mixture of sensibility in terms of creative development and the adventure of and finding out why the omission, denial of African-American artists. And also, strangely enough, at the time, women were also omitted in denial or inclusion in exhibitions and the establishment movement in New York at the time.
Okay, that's my next question is, we have Emma Amos is the only member of the group officially, but who were some of the other women who participated in Spiral unofficially?
Right. What was omission and denial was Spiral was a special group of finding out what's going on, where other groups were not necessarily understanding what the omission and denial. And so the Spiral set out to really be involved with examining by phone and by letter or whatever means they can to find out what's happening. All right. Mm-hmm.
And do you remember any particular women like Vivian Brown or anybody else who was involved?
Well, there was stories out of the fact that women weren't included in Spiral, but that's a myth. Because Vivian Brown and Betty Blayton and Faith Ringo came by not directly involved. Mm-hmm. Augusta Savage was the founder of the Harlem Renaissance school in Harlem, and she wanted to find out what was going on downtown. So Romare Bearden, Norman Lewis, and Charles Orson went downtown, and Augusta Savage stayed in Harlem. She was the founder of the Harlem Renaissance schooling there at the time. And so the ones that went downtown was going to challenge the system of omission and denial. So they felt that they needed to be downtown involved with the mix of what's happening in the art market. So Augustus Savage decided to stay in Harlem and maintain the structure of Harlem Renaissance education in the arts. And so Romare Bearden, Hale Woodruff, Charles Alston went downtown to challenge the art establishment. And at the same time what was going on, we didn't realize until we went downtown that the women were also omitted and denied from any exhibitions and inclusion in the art establishment. So we discovered and found out a larger image of omission and denial and who's in charge of doing this. So we had to check on the different people and organizations at the top of the ladder in the museum system, who's in charge and which group was involved with the omission and control. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Courtney, you interviewed Emma Amos in an oral history. What did she have to say about being the only woman who was a part of the group?
Well, there was the myth in the fact that you realize in 1960, all the women were denied omission and denial, like in the Afro-American artists. Mm-hmm. And so they had their own mission, and not necessarily joining Spiral. All the women got together to challenge the system separately. It had to do with not joining Spiral. They had their mission in terms of Afro-American omission, denial, but women were involved with challenging the system on omission of denial of women. So there was a different mission that took place at the same time of challenging the system.
I think you're absolutely right about that, Richard. You know, one of the things that Emma said, there was kind of a two-part feeling, I think, that she had about why she was included in Spiral, but also what was happening in the rest of the world at the time. And so on the one hand, I think that during our interview, both that which is included in the edited version that's published, and as well as some of the things that we talked about sort of off script, so to speak, is that she felt that she was, you know, she'd largely been invited by Hale Woodruff, whom she had known by way of her family when she was a child in Atlanta. And she felt that because she was younger, that she could be acceptable to the whole of the group because maybe perhaps they thought that she wouldn't challenge them. And she made a list of artists that she thought should have been involved, other women artists. And it's interesting, Richard, you picked out a few of them. One of the first, you know, she talks about as well as Vivian Brown. She also talked about the fact that, you know, Augustus Savage had not been included, even though Savage was known to almost every single person, you know, that was involved in some way, either as a personal associate from having worked together during the Harlem Renaissance or, you know, just by reputation, right? The other thing, though, that Emma really hit on in that interview is that she felt that she also had not necessarily been included in the feminist groups that were largely among white women. And so if there wasn't a space for her necessarily in, you know, with the larger kind of work that Spiral might have done, there also had not been a space that was being made for her with some of the groups that were coming together among women artists, particularly those who were interested in feminist art. And I think she saw herself as moving between both of those spaces, particularly by the end of the 60s, after Spiral's demise. Somebody in the chat just points out that Augustus Savage is deceased by 62. You're absolutely right about that. But I think that one of the things that we know is that Bearden and Lewis and Alston had been talking together as a group well before they come together in 63 to form Spiral. So some of those conversations really should have included someone like Savage.
Let me clear up some things about Amos. She was brought to the group by Hale Woodruff. She had just graduated from Spelman College, and she came to New York. So Hale Woodruff felt it would be important if she could be involved with the group. So he brought Emma Amos to the Spiral group at that time. That's how Emma Amos became part of Spiral, because of the inclusion of Hale Woodruff.
That is absolutely right. But, you know, just before she comes back to New York, or to New York, I should say, she hadn't lived in New York before. Just before she came to New York, she lived in London for a few years, where she'd been at the Royal Academy. And so she is cosmopolitan in a way, but she doesn't necessarily have the kind of European experience that you had had, Richard. She, you know, you had lived in Florence for a number of years. She hadn't had that yet, but she did have London as a kind of knowledge of an art world other than that of New York.
There's such a myth involved here with the Amos, so that just gets a little distorted. And because she was involved with the women movement at the same time, you know, because all the women were being denied, and then also being introduced as being part of Spiral, which she had a dual role to play, which was very good.
Yeah. Okay. So the next slide that we have shows the storefront at 147 Christopher Street that the group rented. Why did they pick that location on Christopher Street?
Why did they pick what?
Why did they pick 147 Christopher Street to use as a space for Spiral?
They were looking for a space for the members to meet instead of you meeting in each other's galleries before in each other studio. And they felt they got very cumbersome, so they found they needed to establish a meeting place, and that's when they set up the studio in West Village, a meeting hall,
And
rather than meeting in their art studios.
how did that help with your mission to fight omission and denial?
What was that?
How did that contribute to helping you fight omission and denial, to have your own space?
In terms of denial and the inclusion, is this what you mean?
Yes, exactly.
The denial, in fact, we had to find out what the establishment, who's in control here, because the same time the women were trying to find out who's doing the same thing, who eliminated the women from being exhibiting an inclusion. And so the same thing with African American artists. How come, who's in charge, and what was the establishment group that was involved with doing this? Who are the individuals or committees or whatever?
And how did you organize having your own space?
So we did a series of investigation by letter and by phone and by design of inclusion and elimination. And they found out who's in charge and who's in control. The establishment was in charge at the time. And in terms of individuals, that's different. It was like a clan that this is what should be the evaluation of American art, and leaving out the minorities, and the women were feel that the fact that they were not representative of the strength of American art.
So what was it that you found that you couldn't get into galleries? You couldn't, what else was a problem for you?
It was just the establishment and who's involved with the establishment and who's in control of the financial control over it, when they museums and galleries and exhibition planning of exhibitions. what was the financial support of that, who's in charge of it. So he did a lot of investigating of people and clans and groups that were involved with the denial and so forth, which was very discriminatory.
Okay. So when you had your own space and you decided to meet, what did you guys talk about?
Well, we were involved with the inventing our own kind of existence by setting up our own exhibitions, and the women did the same thing. They were setting up their own series of exhibitions, which was the movement in order to counteract the omission and denial.
Okay, can you show the next slide? Okay, so the next slide, this is the interior of the space that you had.
Well, we were finding out the establishment group that's involved with doing this. And it is a kind of a financial base of omission and control. And so they...
Did you feel a sense of control having your own space?
Well, so actually the elders and the new young artists that joined them got together to fight the establishment in terms of the omission and denial. And they joined with the women were involved with doing the same thing in the space at the time.
And did you feel power from that? Did you feel strength in numbers? Did you feel that you had power from making your own group?
Well, among our group was the fact that the bringing about the discrimination and omission and bringing it to the forefront of the press, because the press was denying what was going on. So we got involved with the various writers and so forth to get involved with challenging the system in terms of why it's doing what it's doing and who joined which little clan group that was formed to do this. So it was exposing the whole system that was going on at the time. Okay. And establishing what was American art at the time and how it was represented by abstract expressionism, which was moving in on the United States. And how much abstract the African-American artists were involved with abstraction, as well as all the other groups were involved with doing it.
Yeah. Can you show the next slide? Everybody was working in abstract expressionism. Why were all the artists in Spiral interested in abstraction?
Well, actually, if you can look at African-American art at the time, they were involved with a semi-abstraction, and how much they weren't necessarily involved with strong figurative movement, but involved with a design concept. You can see each painting, and there's one such as Norman Lewis did in a march at the time, and with abstract figures moving in a space, and the semi-abstraction of other paintings and design by using color differences, even though they're very representational, such as several artists with the combination of representationalism and abstraction mixed together at the same time. So, which was very unique because it set up a pattern of that which others picked up on as well.
So you decided to have an exhibition in 1965, the first group showing works in black and white. The next slide also shows some of the work from that show. Why choose to work in black and white?
Why the artists worked in black and white, they thought they had to do because of black and white omission and denial at the time, but that's not what it was about. It's all the artists worked in so many different directions, and they would apply that direction, whatever they were working in black and white, and that became their exhibition, representing their work, whatever direction they were working in, but they would be in black and white. And that became the exhibition at the time, which is completely denied by the press and national origin. They had 3 exhibitions, one in West Village, and they had an exhibition in the Long Island University, and the other was in Queens Center, Community Center. And all the exhibitions were denied, and no press covered them ever at all.
Okay. Did you use black and white for every exhibition?
No, it was only for that one exhibition, because it was based on all the artists working in one, and since they all worked in different direction of technique, they doing everything they usually do in their particular thing, only in black and white.
Okay. So Courtney, did you know anything about these, more about these exhibitions?
No, the other 3 exhibitions, I am completely fascinated. So Richard, I was going to ask you, so what are the 2 other shows? Long Island University, there is a gallery out there on the campus that is kind of mid-island.
Notice, no matter what their exhibitions, it was denial and representation and advertisement, and the art establishment just almost like they even existed.
I see.
So the show was not actually advertised or reviewed.
I see.
It was
Were you in those? Were you in those 2 other exhibitions? Were you in the exhibition in Long Island or in Queens?
Well, there was a lot of experiments going on, but they didn't include African-American artists exhibitions.
I see.
They're just complete omission. Same thing with women that were doing it at the same time. And women artists had their own exhibitions going on, but they're completely denied, and there was no press written about it.
Richard, could you tell us a bit about the piece that you included in the show on Christopher Street?
Yeah, go to the next slide. There's a picture of you with the work that you did for Christopher Street.
What the exhibition was in? Well,
Yeah.
I was involved with nature, and nature is constantly in terms of African-American growth, and on the fact that they would, like nature, it constantly reinvents itself. And nature was a perfect example of reflection of society, how people, Afro-Americans reinvented themselves out of slavery into establishment of today, of that era.
Is this the first painting that you made that was wholly tonal as a black and white painting?
What was that about, black and white?
The painting that you showed in the 1965 show, is that the first time that you had painted in only black and white?
Yeah, that was the only exhibition they had, which was completely denied by establishment, and they didn't even review it in terms of black and white, in which there was black and white in all the different directions, how those different artists worked. So
what happened to this work?
Omission, denial, whatever American artists are doing. And so again, we found out what group and the establishment was involved with doing this, and pinned them down and tried to make the press publicize who they are. But that was a denial
What happened to the painting that was in the spiral exhibition?
For the black and white paintings?
Yes.
Well, they wanted to continue the fact that those were the image of black and white artists, and it's not true. That was just an example of painting with black and white, just to be involved with challenge the system in terms of omission denial.
Okay. Can we go to the next image?
Like my painting in black and white is now in the museum of one of the museums in New York, which is green tree instead of a black tree.
Okay. So who came to the reception? Who came to see the exhibition? If it wasn't the press, who was there?
Who? What was that?
Who came to the exhibition? Who came to see it?
Well, whoever came to the exhibition, the publicity in terms of the press never recovered it. Like it was complete omission and denial. That was part of the system which was set up in terms of omission and denial of American artists. Is how they controlled that by using the press to do that as well.
Okay. I have a question for you from the audience. Somebody is asking about Calvin Douglas.
What?
Calvin Douglas. Do you?
Calvin Douglas?
Yes.
What about?
Can you tell us about him?
Well, Calvin Douglas was one of the younger artists that came to Spiral, and his exhibition was like the younger artists, how much you paid attention to his work as well as all the other artists, right? And Calvin Douglas was, again, like the rest of the artists, was not given any emphasis at all because he was part of the Afro-American establishment at the time. There's continued omission and denial.
Yeah. Somebody wants to know about your Native American heritage.
What about?
Is that also part of the omission?
Well, my family was part. My involvement actually as the Afro-American is 1/3. I'm 2/3 Native American. My grandfather was Uncle-Chunk Indian, and my grandmother was Shinnecock. So the two of them came together, but the Shinnecock group was part Afro-American. So there was Afro-American mixture there. And my mother was Cherokee Lumbee, and the Lumbee Indians were part Afro-American. So there was a mixture on that side as well as my father's side. So there was this difference in terms of, and I feel that my identity as Native American is just as legitimate as Afro-American, even many so more so because of which side was there.
And how does that work in your art? How does your Native American culture come out in your art?
My grandmother was Shinnecock, and so she was constantly installing me in the fact that I'm Native American and would tell me how about my culture and the industry and the uniqueness of the sensibility of the mind space, and which was part of her heritage.
Okay.
Well, actually, the earth is the whole thing with Native American, because this was their land and still their land, but you hear anything about them being on it.
Yeah, yeah.
If they don't even exist. the landscape is based on the constant reinventing itself, which nature does. After a fire or damage to nature, it reinvents itself, it rebuilds. This grass is growing again, and the leaves are on all the trees again. It constantly never fails. It's constantly rebuilding and redeveloping. So nature become part of a structure of my art form. And there's re-establishing and continuation. No denial.
Okay. So, what happens when spiral ends?
Actually,
what happens afterwards?
What happens at the end of spiral? Well,
Yeah, you continue to do stuff together?
In 1966, there was all the museums in the United States started hiring artists as teachers. Before that, they didn't hire artists as teachers at the universities. And all the artists, younger artists, became teachers.
So you still got together?
All the younger artists were accepted as teachers at the university. And what they'd taken with them was the inventive, creative sensibility that came out of Spiral. And that was the force of their teaching statement, and the inventive, creative consciousness of a internalized creative existence, internalized. And so that was the emphasis. So when they went to teach at the universities as professors, and all the young artists became professors at universities.
Okay.
Each one went to different universities. Bill Majors went to New Hampshire University. Reginald Gammon went to Western Michigan University as a heavy. Earl Miller went to University of Washington in Seattle. Hale Woodruff was a teacher at NYU for many years, and he wasn't the only one. But the younger artists became teachers at the university, and Emma Amos went to Rutgers University as a professor.
Yeah. I saw that you guys formed, well, Bearden, Norman Lewis, and Ernest Critchlow formed Cinque Gallery in 1969.
Was considered an outsider, but an insider at the same time, because they were close friends with Romare Bearden and Hale Woodruff. And they established the Cinque Gallery, because looking for Afro-American to have representation in galleries. So they set up their own gallery. That was in the 70s. And it was like the women at the same time set up their own kind of exhibitions and in their own galleries. Actually, the women started a women's museum in New York at the time, which was a part of the development of inclusion instead of exclusion.
Okay, so people did people do other things to continue Spiral? Did they also, besides teaching and the gallery, did you find that you had
the message of the sensibility of Spiral in terms of inventive and creative continuation? And so all of them that went to the university, they became professors in teaching interdisciplinary study in terms of advancement of creative thinking and involvement. Emma is,
Courtney, do you have any sense of, in your research about?
Emma Amos went to the University of Rutgers as a professor.
Yeah. So what do you think kept the spirit of Spiral alive?
Creating inventive, intuitive, creative sensibility. And that was what they took to teach and involved with supportive creative development, which was excellent at their various universities, because they brought a special message which came out of Spiral.
I think that's absolutely true. I think some of their students, we have students of many of those members who are here with us today that I think there is the teaching aspect is incredibly important. I think almost all of the artists continue to make work and to show after Spiral ended. And in many ways, the work of Cinque developed some of those artists further and allowed them to have a greater voice. And so there is this, I think that connection between Bearden and Lewis and sort of furthering on the careers of the artists that they had brought together initially does extend for a very long period of time. But I also think that Spiral was really important because it showed the collective nature, I think, of art making at a very specific moment. So artists might have come together because they wanted to talk, or they needed each other for support, or they wanted to have a kind of a space in which they could share material ideas. And that it lasted for a short time, I don't think is wholly accurate. I think it lasted perhaps for as long as they needed, and then they were able to move on and go back to doing their own work individually. And so, in fact, when you look at the sort of history of artist groups, in many ways, they actually lasted for quite a long time compared to many of their peers. So the work was generative, I think, overall.
Well, the success of Spiral was based on the fact that they established their own kind of establishment. Was instead of establishment was opposed to them, that they set up uniqueness of progressive and unique individual arts, of inclusion. And because the development of their direction, such as which Romare Bearden was involved with the collage, and there was just different methods, and others were involved with different kind of sensibility, which was unique to Spiral. It grew out of Spiral. And it had to do with challenging the system, where the system's involved with controlling everything that's going on. The Spiral developed its own kind of monumental mental control system that was competing with the system that was involved with denial and omission.
So somebody wanted to say a few words about Calvin Douglas. And I'm just going to summarize that basically Calvin Douglas was a member, but he was largely forgotten, but he ended up going to Vassar to teach, and he continued to do work, and he was very inspiring to his students, and one of his students is sharing this information. He died in October 2021 at age 90, but
yes, he was one of the last one of Spiral to die, which by the young group. I stayed in touch with him till the end, constantly communicating with him and what he was thinking and how he felt about what happened in the past, which was very good. And that fact that he was the last one of Spiral just passed away.
yeah, so he's somebody that people should do some more work on.
Right.
Okay. Now, what about your own work? Can we go to the next slide?
What about my own work?
How did your work evolve since working with Spiral? This is an example. This is Rhapsody from
It
20.
evolved. It was a continuation, really, of
Yeah.
the sensibility of nature reinventing itself constantly and establishing a stronger image of survival. And that was the reason of my continuation using nature as a symbol of creativity and inventive thinking.
So you recently had an exhibition.
Really inventing itself.
Yeah, you had a big exhibition at the, if you show the next slide, at the Venus over Manhattan Gallery, just earlier this year.
Yeah, with the spirit of nature's continuing in volume and form and in color. And it's constant inspiration that has no end in itself. It only has a continued future in form and space and shapes, which is all of reflected of nature.
So where can people see your work coming up in the future?
Well, hopefully, a lot of the museums across the country have purchased my paintings. So hopefully they can be able to see them in the museums, but also the fact that there's continuation of shows with the different galleries, ACA Gallery and several other galleries that are still sponsoring and supporting my work.
Okay.
But
so
also,
do you have another show planned?
right now, the major museums in the United States have a painting of mine, which is really a pleasure to hear that possibility.
Okay.
All the East Coast museums and the West Coast Museum have paintings of mine, and also in Central United States also. Right.
Okay, so people should look in your local museum for works by Richard.
But they can look them up online. They're listed all online. Where
Okay. All right.
Right.
Courtney, I wanted to ask Courtney if she had any
There's a show coming up at Sonoma Ballet Museum. It's September 23rd.
September 23rd. Okay. So look for that exhibition. Yeah. And Courtney, do you have any programming at the British Art Center that will be of interest to our audience?
We've got all kinds of programming.
It was kind of special for me because I blew up a balloon up there and put musicians inside of it.
Oh, that's exciting.
That was part of interdisciplinary study plan. Well, that was my design course, by the way.
Richard, I can't wait to see your show. It's going to be very exciting.
Right. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. If anybody has any last questions, they should post them in the Q&A, but we're getting to the time that we have to wrap up. So we want to thank you so much for this really great talk. We really appreciate your insights about Spiral and your work. And
well, I'm very pleased and happy about this interest, that there's some continuation, and the fact that it was part of a group that inspired me, which was part of Spiral. So it's how much one doesn't get this on their own. There's other support system that makes a difference. And then having a sponsor like having a sponsor like which makes a difference in terms of one's development and continuation. It was right. Well, the easy gallery, but not name. She was here yesterday.
Oh, Pamela Joyner.
Pamela Joyner was my sponsor, and I feel very obligated to her in terms of support through the years. She bought many of my paintings when I was starting as a young painter. And so she was, through the years, constantly in sit-up exhibitions and special shows, which have been in museums recently. A whole room in the Museum of Modern Art, San Francisco, which was a special celebration by her support.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much to both of you for joining us this evening. We're really pleased that you were able to participate. It was a pleasure and an honor to speak to both of you. And just to wrap up, I would like to, on the behalf of Deirdre Harris Kelly and Joanne Bryant Reed of the Bearden Foundation, I would like to thank Nadal Kanari for his production of this event. The Cinque Artist Program is brought to you with the support of the Foundation's partners, Harlem One Stop and the Harlem Cultural Collaborative. And I would like to remind you that you can find out more about the Romare Bearden papers at the website wpi.art. To keep up with the Bearden Foundation's programming, you can visit their website at thebeardenfoundation.org and follow them on social media. So thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate your participation and viewership. And the Bearden Foundation would like to say good night.
Thank you. Thanks for the support. Right.